Well, welcome everybody to Beyond the Devastation, episode 16. Today we're going to talk about beyond the automotive industry, where we are, what's going on. I today decided to bring on a gentleman who I work with and had the honor of working side by side with for a number of years when we were at Cox Automotive. And he's got his finger on the pulse. He's on podcasts. He's doing work with NADA. He certainly had, with a 25-year rich history in the automotive business. He comes to us from Cox Automotive. He has a 25-year career, as I said, in the car business. Believe it or not, I didn't realize this about Brian, is that he started out working at the 800 number for Nissan, then graduated to being a district sales manager, working between Atlanta and DC. He's a father. He's a husband. He's down in Nashville, Tennessee, and he is a true friend. And I've got to give him credit for this, and I'm going to bring him on because he's the one that gave me this, and I got to make sure I give him credit. So when I was doing my exit in 2019, Brian made a point to say, hey, Perez, you got to make your messages snack size, snackable. You can't talk for an hour and 3 hours. Nobody's going to pay attention. And you know what? We have endeavored to do exactly that. So truly honored to have my friend, Brian Finkelmeyer, today. You are the senior director, because I want to make sure I get that right, from Cox Automotive. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
John, great to see you. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking about the car business. I like talking about my family. I like talking about sports, and I like talking about the auto industry. So as long as we talk about those three things, we'll have a good time.
And you know what? From a sports perspective, let me say this. Brian is an avid tennis player. He's come to New York and been in Flushing, Queens for the U.S. Open. He loves tennis, and everything else I don't know, but I know tennis. And but I believe you went to school in Wisconsin. Did you not, Brian?
I did, John. Yeah, I was a Badger, and I graduated college and started, as you mentioned, answering 1-800 telephone calls for Nissan. And we used to joke back then we couldn't spell CSI, customer satisfaction. And yes, you're right. I love coming up to New York every fall. In fact, the last, I think, 24 years, I've only missed 3 U.S. Opens. Wow. I had 2 children that were born during the summer, so that kind of kept me from going. And then, of course, during the global pandemic was the only other reason that you're not going to see me up watching tennis on Labor Day weekend in New York.
Yeah, no, and that's true. And just to give everybody a background, so Brian supported our team, and our team, we worked for the software side of Cox Automotive V-Auto. And at that time I was working in our new car software, and Brian was there to give us metrics, give us what's going on in the car business with his vast history, and also to give us, what were some of the trends, where were some of the holes, and where were some of the things we should really look at and try to take advantage of. Brian and I worked, here when he came to New York. He'd come in and we kind of parachute into New York. We'd go to see dealers, and it was about him learning the market, but the market understanding that he also knew you weren't going to pull one over on Brian. So, but Brian, one thing that I've been looking at and staying in contact with my fellow teammates and as well as yourself, what in the world is going on in the car business today? So can you please educate us? Because I'll tell you, I've been in just going in, like I told you last week when we set this up, I went to talk to the dealer where I normally get my oil change, and he told me how much they were charging for cars now. And then the biggest thing they told me is that here's a dealer that normally has all this inventory, and they got 20 cars in the lot. What in the world is still going on? And I thought the pandemic would be over when it came to the automotive space, but it looks like it's not.
Yeah, John, I don't even know where to start on that question. It is probably the single most remarkable moment and shift that the auto industry has ever seen. I mean, you were making me feel a little old talking about my 25 years, but certainly in my time in the car business, we've never seen anything like this. And I don't think in the history of the industry have we ever come anywhere near what's happened. So I guess a couple of things. I'll just start at the beginning. Yeah. If you went back to the fall of 2019, just to level set with everyone, there were about 4 million cars scattered across franchise dealers, across the United States. So just not even talk about their used car inventory, just their new car inventory, about 4 million cars. And then we had the COVID hit in March and in April and May, and even part of, I think, June. Many of the big manufacturers, due to the concern about the pandemic, just simply shut off production. So every month, the industry is producing close to 1 million units a month. So just right there, we lost 2 million cars that should have been produced that just were not ever built because of the pandemic. And then as things started coming on and you had all the stimulus money and consumers were not spending money on vacations, they weren't going out to dinner as much, they weren't taking their kids to the movies. I think all of us during those kind of dark days of the pandemic were looking for a little bit of happiness. And sometimes, it's like, hey, maybe we should go get a new car. And so in the second half of 2020, what ended up happening was demand just came roaring back as many Americans were buying cars, some of which was for emotional benefits, I would say.
Absolutely.
And some of them were really, quite frankly, based on health concerns, right? Because in big metro cities like New York, where public transit is such an important mechanism for people getting around town, there's a lot of people that were saying, I don't really want to get on the bus with another 60 people.
Absolutely.
And so now all of a sudden there's this huge demand for cars. And then one of the other big things that was booming in 2019 was ride sharing, Uber and Lyft, and everything was about taking public transit that way. Well, once again, people are like, I don't want to get in the car with some stranger. I'm going to go buy my own car. So it was like this perfect blend of supply started to shrink because of the lack of production, and then demand just skyrocketed. And so you had those elements in place. And then the next chapter of the story, where things get even more crazy, is there are 4 primary microchip producers around the globe. Thailand, Taiwan, actually there's one in Texas, and I believe China is the 4th one. And you couldn't make it up. If it was in a movie, nobody would believe it. There were like massive fires broke out at 2 of those plants that caused like catastrophic damage in Thailand for sure. And then there was a situation where you had COVID outbreaks at these microchip plants. So they, from time to time, once they kind of get things going back again, they're like, oh, we got 3,000 people have COVID. We have to shut this microchip plant down again. And then in the case of the biggest domestic producer of microchips down near Austin, Texas, you might remember last winter, like they had all these pipes were freezing, and there was like, what was it? 2 weeks of below freezing temperatures, and
it was a frozen tundra. It was like Wisconsin, Brian. It was like going to Green Bay.
Yes, exactly. So they had problems. And so you just add all of these things together, and it's created this perfect storm, which has resulted in a complete inversion of supply and demand. And so the last thing I'll say is as I mentioned, before the pandemic, there were 4 million cars on the ground. The industry would sell about 1 million cars a month, give or take. Now we're in a situation where I would say we're still selling 1 million cars a month, but we have 4 consumers shopping for every 1 car that's on the ground. So it used to be 4 cars to every 1 shopper. Now we got 4 shoppers to every 1 car. And that leads to the next point that you made, which is dealers are able to capitalize on the situation, and their margins have never been better.
Yeah, and these margins remind me, Brian, I mean, I started in the car business, and I'll be 58 next week. So I started in the car business 83, and it was the wild, wild west then, right? I mean, it was completely, we were, whatever was on the sticker, you can bump it, everybody got pinstripe, everybody got this. I mean, grosses were through the roof. Now what we're seeing is, and before I make that point, Brian, let me do this, because not only what you said about the production, but what I also was hearing, I have a friend of mine who works at Hertz, several friends of mine that worked at Hertz. They're also saying now that it impacted the rental business. You mentioned ride share, but what I'm also hearing now is that they were saying that it was 25 to 30% increase in pricing when it came to rent a car.
Yeah. So if you look at all the different sectors of the economy that have been impacted by inflation, the top one is actually rental cars, and then the second one is used car values, and they're sort of intertwined. And so, what's interesting on that piece, John, is when the pandemic hit, you take an airport like LAX in Los Angeles, probably one of the top 3 airports in America.
Yep.
Thousands of rental cars that are coming in and out every single day. They literally had nowhere to park these cars. So LA Dodger Stadium's parking lot got used as offsite storage for all of LAX's cars.
Oh, wow.
Because they had nowhere to go with them. And at that time, Enterprise and Hertz, and you might remember Hertz actually filed for bankruptcy, but
Yeah.
Enterprise quickly pivoted from a rental car business to a used car seller. And so if you went to enterprise.com, it didn't ask, where do you want to rent a car? What airport are you flying to? It said, are you interested in a sedan, an SUV, a truck, or a minivan? Are you looking to spend $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, et cetera? And then the consumer basically had access to buying used cars directly from Enterprise. So Enterprise, usually would sit on somewhere between 800 and 900,000 cars in their rental fleet that were not being rented. That at that moment, which is crazy, there was massive depreciation on those cars. They were like, we want to get away from these used cars.
The perfect storm.
Yeah. So, had they just sat tight, they kind of probably made more money than they've ever made before on waiting a little bit as the market changed so dramatically. And so, really, John, I'll someday, maybe when I have grandkids, I'll be able to, have my grandson sit on my lap and tell them about 2021 in the auto industry, because it was a crazy year.
I'm surprised you haven't written the book yet, because it's got to be insane with what we're seeing. And again, for some, you've been around for 25 years. I've been around it, from a distance and in it for a long time. But I'm seeing things that of course, we've never seen in our lifetime. So now Hertz is affected. Our rental cars are affected. Retail is affected. Every segment is affected. I'm sure even Ubers and everybody else, their prices increases because if you're buying a new car, you had to offset the spread somehow. But now Joe Consumer walks in to buy a car. Example, Brian, I walked into the Toyota store that's normally stocked to the brim. I asked my friend who's been selling cars there since '96, and I go up to him and said, "Okay, hey man, so how many Camrys do you have in stock?" 10.
Yeah.
How many Corollas you got in stock? 5. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I thought Toyota said that they were going to go back to normal somewhere at the beginning of the year. What happened to that plan?
Yeah. So a couple of things have happened there, John. One of which is, to your point, over the course of the last 12 to 15 months, I've read the same things that like, hey, next quarter, we think things are going to get better. Or, hey, next summer, we think things are going to get better. And then the ball just keeps getting punted and punted. And so I think for your listeners, I would say that the remainder of 2022, we're probably going to see more of the same. And the thing that we have to keep in mind is that, as I mentioned before, the industry used to have 4 million cars on the ground. Today, we don't even have 1 million on the ground. It's probably closer to 500,000. So each month, if the industry can only build 1 million, but we're selling 1 million, we're never actually able to build inventory.
Right. So
the only way that we can build inventory is we can start building 1.4 million a month, but sell 1.3 million a month. But, that is the situation that you're talking about. There's still a ton of demand in the marketplace. So right now they believe that like we could be selling more new cars if we had them.
Right.
Last month, in the month of January, retail was off about 9% from a year ago. But inventories are off 70% from a year ago. So think about that. Sales are only off 9%. Inventories are off 70%. So I know that there's always, and I always want to be an optimist, but I would say I'm also a realist. And the realist part of me says it is going to take us a significant amount of time to get to a point where each month the industry is able to produce more cars that are being purchased so that we can begin to build inventory, which would have the effect of relieving some of the high prices that consumers are having to pay on both new and used vehicles right now.
So the other thing you and I used to talk about with the team a lot was when dealers had so much inventory, they were paying so much interest on their cars, right? We were calculating that to the penny. Your floor plan is so much, and we're not going to go into what floor plan means, guys. But all those expenses that the dealer had, and that's what we use to certainly educate them, saying, hey, you got 5 yellow cars that you're never going to sell. Now they're selling those yellow cars because they got nothing else to sell.
Yeah.
But what the thing it's been concerning, Brian. I drove by some of the dealers that I used to service, right? Some of them are a ghost town. I drove by one here in the Hudson Valley. It used to be a Chevy store. Literally, there's one car in the showroom. There's hardly anything on the grounds. What are you hearing? What's happening to the dealer? And then we're going to go into the consumer. I mean, are we losing dealers because of this?
No, actually, John, times have never been better for American car dealers. It's an all-time bonanza of both high margins on both new and used vehicles. Actually, the margins on new are better than used. It always used to be the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because new cars were always a commodity. I remember one time I was looking in Washington, D.C., there were 400 silver LE Camrys for sale just in Washington, D.C. So the consumer had a lot of pricing power,
right?
Because it's like, well, if I can shop this dealer against that dealer against this dealer because they're all silver Camry LEs, right? But in the current environment, that has completely gone away. And to your point, John, many dealers around the country are sitting on single digits in inventory. And in fact, this morning, the Wall Street Journal published an article that said that Toyota has announced that 50% of their incoming pipeline of vehicles often that have not even been produced yet, or that are on a carrier truck or on a rail car headed towards a dealer, 50% of the incoming units have already been sold. I mean, this is another mind boggler. We've never seen anything like that. We used to sell from in-stock inventory.
Right.
Now we're having to sell from incoming pipeline. And so, just everything, John, it's funny is you were kind of recollecting about the good old days back in 2018, 2019.
Oh, yeah.
All the playbooks that we had back then, you can pretty much throw them in the garbage. It doesn't matter anymore. Everything's changed so dramatically for both the dealers and the consumer.
So the dealers doing well. That's good news. And what you reminded me of was selling from incoming inventory. It was like I thought Subaru was the only one that did that. Now everybody's doing it, right? I mean, Subaru used to sell them off the truck, right? Now it's almost everybody's affected by that. So the good news is that the dealer's still making money, and he's making probably more money. And I think what I heard my friend say what he was telling his customers, he was like, it was the first time in a long time that the shoe was on the other foot. Now they were driving behavior as far as what pricing was, not Kelley Blue Book, not Edmunds, not everybody saying, hey, this is what you can buy this car for, because that's even out the window. Now he's saying for the first time, they were making money on new cars and they were happy and they don't want it to go back.
Yeah. John, I was this past week in Michigan, which sort of, the mecca of the auto industry with
Absolutely,
the domestic Ford and General Motors and now Stellantis. And I actually had dinner with a couple of dealers that were telling me about a new product in the marketplace, really a marketplace for dealers called Car Offer, that allows dealers to place bids on other vehicles dealers. So for example, John, if you went in and did an appraisal on a car and our software told you that car was worth about $15,000 based on the market condition, you literally get a simultaneous offer from, could be anywhere in the country, any dealer in the country that might say, I'll pay $18,000 for that car right now. And in fact, I'll pay 18 and I'll cover the cost of the shipping. Please ship that car from Michigan to California. This blew my mind. I literally just learned of this week. This dealer I talked to has done 150 of these transactions in the last 2 months. And he told me often is the case, he's making $3,000 ahead of the expected retail. So he could say, hey, I think I can retail this car for 18 grand. He's got dealers in California that'll pay him 21 grand. So it's just a crazy situation.
Yeah, so let's pivot to talk about the consumer. We know that it sounds like the rich are getting richer still. And look, even the dealers I've talked to since I've left the business are fat, dumb, and happy right now. Nobody's complaining. I mean, the salespeople are, for whatever cars they've got, they're making money, and the sales managers, they're making money, and it's really easy to sell a car because I've got it, nobody else has got it, and you're going to pay for it. That's kind of seems to be the pattern. But what does this do, Brian? And this is where I really wanted to talk to Brian about, because what my concern is that if people are paying up for cars today, right? If you're paying $2,000-3,000 more, the dealer was telling me that, hey, if somebody's coming in for a Tundra, I'm hitting them for like $5,000, $10,000 over MSRP all day long. And I mean, I thought that was kind of heavy in my brain, but let's say he's paying MSRP or greater. What does that do when the market does correct itself?
Yeah. So John, you remember back in the day, one of my favorite, sort of idols of all time is Warren Buffett, the great American investor, whose claim to fame is value investing, right? He wants to try to acquire attractive assets that he thinks are underpriced. And there's a lot of parallels to the auto industry as there is to the stock market right now. One thought that's going through my mind is probably about a month ago, Tesla cracked, I think, $1,200 a share, if my memory serves me.
Yeah.
And I guess when that was at an all-time high, do I really want to be the guy that's buying Tesla stock at $1,200 a share? Probably not. And so I think similarly on the car side of the business, I would be reluctant to want to go out and be the guy that paid $10,000 over sticker to get the new Bronco, because that's what I hear they're going for.
Absolutely.
And so I think that I would kind of use that value mindset and say, hey, if I have a family life change, we're having a baby, I need to get a bigger vehicle to carry my kids. I have a child that's going off to college, I need to help them get a car. There's certainly that certain amount of the purchases that take place every month are more based on necessity than sort of desire.
Right.
And so I would say my advice to your listeners would be to say, hey, if you have to buy a car out of necessity, it is what it is. You get try to do your best to pay no more than sticker if you can. And you might also consider leasing, because on a lease, you have no forward-looking risk against what the valuation of that car is. So before the pandemic, the average American consumer was carrying anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 of negative equity on their trade. Absolutely. Which was, hey, my trade payoff is 20, it appraised at 16. Hey, Mr. Perez, how do you want to handle that $4,000? One way that consumers can avoid that risk is a lease is almost like an insurance policy against future valuation declines. And what's beautiful about the lease is that the consumer has control at the end of the lease. So like, for example, I've leased my cars, and at the end of my lease, I can say, well, the payoff on this car is 20, but I can see that Carvana will give me 23,000 for it. I can make, I can make
$3,000. Absolutely.
Or conversely, my payoff on it was 20. I've made all my payments. The vehicle's only worth 16,000.
I'm walking away.
Right. And so I would say that if I had to be in the market for a new car right now, I would take a hard look at leasing as a way to protect myself against that future valuation decline that you touched on. I think that would be probably prudent way to think about it.
Yeah. I don't know what our old boss is. I mean, my old boss, Dale is saying these days with the market, but it's got to, you would think that it would correct itself somewhere, somehow. And, the money that people are making off used cars, and I've heard the stories. I called my old boss, and, he was sharing some things of how the money that people were making on used cars. I saw it firsthand, and on a couple deals that I helped my family with, that dealers were paying up for Honda Civics. I mean, they were paying up for everything. And the wash that I told my family was this: you're getting $2,000 more for your trade, but you're paying sticker. So it's a wash in some cases, so look at it that way. You got more for your trade than you'll ever get, but you had to pay sticker. But at the end of the day, there's only maybe $1,800 markup, $2,000 markup in a Civic anyway. So it's a wash. Everybody wins. And that's kind of the way I've been positioning some of my family and friends. But for these bigger ticket stuff, Brian, it's crazy out there. It really is.
I think the last thing, John, that I would add to the story
Yeah.
is that the car manufacturers, one of the other ways in which they've seen their profit situation improve, although they wish that they could build way more cars,
Right.
their margin per car has improved pretty dramatically because they no longer have to incentivize like they used to. So just as a reference point, before the pandemic, manufacturers would spend anywhere from about 10 to 11% of the transaction price on incentives. So let's just make it simple and say it was a $40,000 car. The typical incentive would be somewhere between $4,000 and maybe $4,400. In today's market, that has dropped to about 3%. So, that car that used to have $4,000 of incentive now maybe has a couple $100 at best.
Wow. So Brian, let me ask this question because I've been when we wrap up here, the last couple minutes. You touched on Tesla earlier before. Let's see if you can talk about that for a few minutes. How is the EV market? How is it impacting the market today? And I know that certainly Hertz bought their fair share of Teslas just recently and kind of helped the market share of Tesla go up a slight bit. But how is EV changing the scope now of the market since the success of the Tesla? And you even mentioned the new car that's based there in Michigan.
John, a couple of thoughts. One of which is there's a whole lot to unpack there on the electric car piece, but I'd say a couple things. One of which is that the electric car companies have completely changed the game in terms of how consumers buy cars. So today we buy from John Perez Toyota or Brian Finkelmeyer Nissan, where with Tesla, with Rivian, with Lucid, some of these new entrants, the consumer is able to buy directly from the car company. They don't have a network of franchise dealers. So I think that's one important thing that they're changing the game on. Now, one thing that I find to be fascinating is that a lot of the states, Michigan being one of them because of the car business, Michigan does not allow for direct-to-consumer sales. They have state statutes on the books to protect their franchise dealer network against sort of a player like Tesla saying, I want to open up a Tesla dealership. So if you're a Michigan resident, you cannot buy a Tesla in the state of Michigan. You would have to go to Ohio to get your Tesla and then bring it back to Michigan.
Wow.
And John, even crazier is the state of Texas. Elon Musk has relocated the headquarters and the big manufacturing, he calls it his gigafactory or his gigaplant in Austin. And so you can work at Tesla in Austin. You can build a car that they build Teslas in Austin, but you cannot take delivery on a car in Austin. If you're a Texas resident, you have to drive to Oklahoma to get your Tesla and then bring it back to Texas because of these state rules. So what I would tell you that is just a mind boggler is to think that last year, Tesla finished the year with about 3.1, 3.2% market share. But they do not have access to 100 million American consumers. Think about that.
Wow.
So Tesla last year outsold Mercedes, they outsold Lexus, they outsold BMW, and they had not maybe one arm, but maybe almost practically both arms behind their back, and that those car companies have access to all of those consumers. Tesla cannot sell cars to 100 million residents of the United States. Directly in their homes. They have to go acquire it across state lines. So I think that's kind of interesting. The last thing that I'll say, John, on the EV piece is I think absolutely it is coming. And I don't want to be like, the guy with the VHS video player that's saying, I don't believe that Netflix is going to ever change the world. Like, I don't want to be
so
that
you don't
guy.
want to be Blockbuster right now is what you're trying to tell me.
But
okay.
I do feel I'm going to be a little Blockbuster-ish with this comment.
Okay.
Which is, you look at these EV players out there right now. Rivian, it's starting at 77,500 or give or take. Lucid is another electric car company. It's 80 grand. Many of the Teslas are in that range. And in fact, I just learned yesterday that vehicles that are priced $60,000 and higher only represents 15% of total sales. And then if you got to like 70,000 and higher, it drops to about 5%.
Wow. Okay.
So these car companies are going after about 5% of the US market, which tends to be really, really affluent people. So, do I think that 3 to 5% of the public's going to drive an electric car here in the next few years? Yeah, probably. Do I think it's going to get to 10% anytime soon? I wouldn't think that until I saw that consumers could buy a crossover for
40
say
grand.
$40,000, right? And once that happens, then we'll have a better sense of to what degree is this adoption going to take place. And 2022 is going to be a bit of a litmus test for that, because Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, Toyota, and there's one fifth one that I'm forgetting, are all launching small crossover electric.
And I think Chevy
vehicles.
even mentioned they were going to play in that game, Brian. They were trying to come up in that be in that 40 grand space as well. I had read an article.
Yes. So I think as this year progresses and those cars get launched, it'd be very, very interesting to see to what extent is the guy that has a budget of $500-600 a month, is he deciding to try the new Nissan Aria crossover versus picking up a Nissan Pathfinder. So I think that this will be a very, very interesting year to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. Well, listen, time is certainly is capturing us here, but listen, Brian and I tell you, even though I left the company in July, Brian and I still text each other and still stay in touch. And he's always a wealth of knowledge. And again, I never would have changed to snack size sermons if it wasn't for Brian. So I really appreciate it. So again, my friend, I can't thank you enough for this education. I am hoping that when you do come to New York, that I could at least meet you somewhere and we can catch up. I know you're going to be, tennis hungry, but hopefully you'll be food hungry too. And we can catch up and do some stuff.
Hey.
But Brian,
John, you never have to twist my arm to come get a piece of New York pizza. You just name the time and place and I'll be there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, thank you again for jumping on. Thank you for explaining what's going on. So listen, if you wanted to take the tips from Brian today, this is what my takeaways are. Look, in this volatile market that we're at, leasing is probably your best bet to protect yourself and protect your investment and your wallet, that is, and protect yourself there. Really, if you don't need it, don't buy it. And if you do, be wise. And I think look at around the marketplace. But I think that was a great tip. I think leasing is great. Look, if at the end of 3 years you're up, you can sell it. If you're down, walk away, turn in the keys, and start all over again. Yeah. Great. I think that's a great lesson right there. And if you're buying a used car, all I can tell you is you are paying a premium. that much I know. And I've seen it in the marketplace. Brian, thank you so much. I'm going to give a couple of things here, and I'm going to put you back in the green room here for a second. Hold on.
Hey, John, great to see you, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Well, listen, this was certainly our episode 16, talking beyond the car sale. Brian has been a great resource for me. I hope you take something from this because it was awesome. And we're just going to play you out and talk to you next week.